Welcome to Chat Operand, viewers. This is episode 1, and today we're going to talk about balance. What is balance? In this context, we're talking about the balance of the universe, right? And that's kind of a laughable kind of statement to make. What does the balance of the universe have to do with us in our conversations that we're going to have? What does the balance of the universe have to do with trending topics? What does it have to do with social trends? What does it have to do with men's mental health? What does it have to do with emerging technology? What does it have to do with all the things that we're going to be talking about on this channel? What is it going to have to do with all the episodes in the future? How does this affect anything? What does it matter? Right? So the balance helps us understand how we want to approach any given particular subject. It informs our mindset on how we want to understand the things that we're going to speak about and how we're going to listen to those things and how we're going to form ideas and how we're going to form opinions. So understanding that, what specifically do we mean by balance, right? So what specifically is balance in this context? So I'm gonna start at the very beginning, right? So a lot of the times when you hear people talk about balance, you think of the yin yang, because that's essentially what whenever people talk about balance, what they're referring to is the yin yang, and that is the core of where I got the idea from. Is understanding the yin yang, and the yin yang is basically, in a summation, is the balance of inclusion. I don't want to use the word inclusion; that's a bad term, but it's you can't have one thing without another. You can't have light without dark. You can't have good without bad. But the core concept of it was manyfold. It had to do with the balance of the masculine and the feminine, but you also had to have those things to complement each other, right? They weren't opposites. And that's one of the things that's very important to understand about balance. Balance isn't about opposing forces necessarily. It's how opposing forces are necessary but complementary to each other, right? So that's the key to balance and understanding how you want to be informed and how you want to understand topics and how you want to approach things, right? So, for example, we understand that nature versus man's place in the world, right? So as we build out things and as we develop societies and we build architectures and we build out technologies, we've come to understand that we can't do that at the expense of nature. That nature has its place and we have to respect that. I'm not going to get into, in this episode, the context of global warming and, the green effort and all that. That's not the context here. But I believe we can all agree that we've become to understand our impact on the world as far as pollution. And, pollution's bad. We don't dump oil in our rivers anymore, and and all of those kind of things, that we have to take a more conscientious look on how man impacts the earth, and that as we move forward, a lot of our technologies have to be more respectful of that, right? So as humans who inhabit that world, we still have to do things that benefit mankind, which is one side, right? But we still have to do things that are respectful of the nature, which is the other side. And with those two things, we have to live together in harmony. And that's the balance, of which I speak. Again, you might look at those two things as opposing, right? But they're complementary and in harmony if we do things properly, right? A good example is like down in Florida, at one point, they decided that they had a feral cat problem. So they went in, and the feral cat problem was a human-created problem where people had not taken care of, a lot of the cats that they had brought into the world. They weren't spaying and neutering properly, and so they were just, they couldn't take care of the cats, couldn't feed them whatever, and stray cats, which is a problem everywhere, right? But there were just too many cats. So they went in and did a big program down in this one particular area and got rid of a bunch of the cats. Brought them in, spayed, neutered them, put them back out, really reduced the feral cat population. But what ended up happening is the rodent population, specifically rat population, exploded. Because the feral cat population had been controlling the rodent population, which was a man-made problem. Both the rodent problem and the cat problem, both man-made problems. I mean, we didn't create the rodents. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying, right? But we had taken away their natural predators and allowed the rodent population to build up. But then when we introduced the cats, the cats we had discovered taking care of the rodent population, but then we thought the cats were a man-made problem. So we fixed the man-made problem of the cats. So understand that those things, which we thought at one point were opposing the man-made problem of the cats, that was a man-made issue in nature over here, but turned out to be kind of a harmonious solution. And you can go down the rabbit hole and argue that, well, if we wouldn't have done this, there wouldn't have been the rat problem, and yada yada, and I get all that. But at the same time, humans are here. We are making an impact. We have made an impact. And you have to understand that we can't take those things back. So we have to live in the most harmonious balance that we can as we progress as a society. And you make choices based on those things, right? So that's a balance thing. That's a balance issue. That's a balance of nature, man versus nature. And that is one small example. Again, I know you can go down the rabbit hole. I'm not arguing that point. So you also have to understand that balance is also about scale and scope, right? Balance is not perfect. So one of the things that I try to encourage people is to look at balance from a standpoint of scale and scope, right? So balance cannot be viewed in the minutia. It can't be viewed in every single aspect of life and existence, right? So a lot of people are saying, well, there's no balance in the world, because there are criminals out there getting away with stuff, or there's child predators and this and that. And I totally get that. There are a lot of bad people out there in the world. But there's also a lot of really, really, really good people out there in the world as well. The balance of that. Well, Gray, there's a lot of really, really, really poor people out there in the world who are just really sick, and starving. Yep. And there's a lot of really rich people out there who are very healthy and doing a lot of good stuff. Well, that's not fair. Well, it's not about fair. I get that it sucks, but it's not about fair. Things are, they tend to balance out that way. But understand it's not in the minutia. It's in the scale and scope. Things eventually, or things are balanced out to a point. And also understand again, scale and scope. Things may not be balanced out in the scale of the here and now, right? Things also are like a teeter-totter. Things have to also sometimes come to balance. So for example, throughout history, there have been class imbalances. A lot of people would say that right now, currently, the United States is going through a class imbalance, or at least a wealth distribution imbalance, right? But throughout history, a lot of the times those class imbalances got balanced out through revolution, revolt, and those the wealthy people in power who were abusing that got taken down a peg through revolution. I mean, the French Revolution, a lot of other things. I'm not a great historian, but I know enough to know that a lot of those situations got taken care of. They got balanced out. I mean, look at one of the greatest empires in history. I mean, the English Empire at one time, it was the largest empire in the world, did a lot of shady stuff, did a lot of very unfair and not very good stuff to a lot of people. United States is one, right? We didn't like the way they treated us, and we had our revolution. But there were a lot worse places in the world under the British rule than the United States. And now they're back to a very small island in comparison. So it's also scale and scope, right? The bad in the world can be measured out by the good in the world. And I firmly believe that, that is a thing that can be done. And eventually so many bad things get done that people begin to look for the so many good things that can get done. And on the same hand, there can also be so many good things that get done that eventually bad things, end up cropping up. For example, once so many good things get done, then then corruption starts, right? For example, in the government, because, you can't have one side of something without the other thing, because it's also one of the things about balance is compare and contrast, right? So you can't have good without evil to compare and contrast it to. You can't have strength without weakness, because without something that's weak, there is nothing that is strong. Without something that is evil, there is nothing that is good. It just is, right? It's the norm. It's the baseline. If you have nothing to compare it to that is worse than it is not a positive. Without positive and negative, without a negative, positive then just becomes neutral. So that's something to think about as we think about the balance, right? And also, bringing up a very good point, also think about balance. Think about that neutral point. Think about the center. Think about the balance point of the balance. And we'll get to that in just a second. So why do I specifically believe in the balance so much? Well, a lot of the reasons I've already given, a lot of the dialogue there, but the reason I believe in the balance is simply because it's the old adage of you can't have too much of a good thing. Well, you also, obviously, as most people believe, you don't want too much of a bad thing, right? But I firmly believe you don't want too much of a good thing, because then that good thing becomes taken for granted. That good thing becomes not valued. There's a lot of topics where you can say, well, obviously balancing something out makes sense. Like for your health, you don't want too much sugar because obviously then your health goes to crap. Well, you don't want too much alcohol, right? I mean, a lot of the things we found out that balances, it's just common sense that you balance things out, right? But in other things, you question, why would you want to balance something out? And if you really think about the root of that question in the specific topic that you're thinking about, it becomes kind of self-evident. Why would I want to balance? For example, let's pick a topic of, feminism right now. And I'm just picking this one out of the blue. I'm not picking on feminists in any way. I'm just picking this one out. Why would you want to balance out feminism a little bit? Well, let's use like Pearly, for example. She's a content creator. A lot of people know Pearly, but let's use Pearly for example. She feels that feminism has gone too far because it hasn't balanced out. That feminism has gone too far and is now detrimental to women and detrimental to men and detrimental to relationships. She feels that women have sabotaged themselves and have given up a lot of things that make them women attractable, dateable is the word she uses, or attractive to men, not in the physical sense, but somebody that men appreciate because of their extreme feminist views. And so that is a very distinct example of where you might look at a topic and say, maybe that's where we need to balance things out a little bit. Is feminism a good thing? Absolutely. Women need to be represented equitably. I won't say equally. That's another topic for another time, but definitely equitably. But like anything else, it can be pushed too far in this person's view, in this creator's view. And so where do we stop with that? So that's a topic, right? That's a thing that somebody could think about and say, well, there's no harm in pushing that to its extreme. There's no harm in pushing that all the way to its logical conclusion. I'm just giving a specific example. So, and that's to me why that's important, is because there are a lot of those topics of thought. There are a lot of those motions that sometimes you have to stop, right? And so, and the other thing is simply that, one of the things I believe about our society in America, and I think this is a world thing, but I have not traveled enough around the world to say this is a world thing. I can only specifically say this about the United States, in that our culture is a very pendulum-like culture. We love to swing to extremes. So we find a wrong over here, and we like to act on it, and we 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 act on it. But we don't stop when we've resolved it, or when we've come to a good moderate resolution. We've got to keep acting on it until we're way on the far extreme of where we started. So we're extreme in the other direction, right? So we may be in the extreme wrong here, but instead of making it right, we've gone to the extreme in the other direction. And that's misfortunate. For an example, the whole police violence thing that has been going on. So we've had some issues where police have done the wrong thing. In instances, it's been proven. So police have done some wrong things. So instead of resolving the issue, issues resolved. We've either beefed up some training, removed what bad apples were in there, done a corrective action. But no, we've pushed it, defund the police, remove police departments, blah, blah, blah. Now we're way over here, and we've got cities where Walmarts are being ransacked, and businesses are fleeing because there's not enough police. There's not enough funding for these neighborhoods to be actively patrolled, or whatever the case may be. Actively patrolled, not enough resources to pay overtime. Police are, because of the outrage of previous issues, they don't feel comfortable going into these neighborhoods doing the right thing because they're going to get vilified on TV, whatever the case may be, because we've overreacted. And we didn't create balance in the situation. We didn't have a balanced approach to the situation. And so that's an extreme. Now, I'm not saying that the initial extreme outrage wasn't justified. Again, that's a topic for another time. But I'm saying the solutions and how we went through the whole problem solving process, right? Because I'm not taking away from anybody's concept of pain and anger over the initial wrongdoing. And I'm talking about the stuff that was proven wrong, okay? But I'm not taking away from anybody's pain and rage from the initial wrongdoing, because that can be extreme, right? We can express that. I'm talking about throughout the whole problem-solving process. We didn't stop at moderation. We didn't stop at solving. We had to go to the other extreme and do something that really didn't solve because we went all the way to the other extreme. We didn't balance that out, right? So that's why I believe in the balance so much. That's why I believe in that when you live your life, you have to understand that there's a balance in all things. Not like everything, right? There's goods and there's bads. There's pros, there's cons, and everything. So, right. So I'm not trying to say that understanding that there's a balance in all things and approaching things in life with a balanced outlook is all good, because it's not, right? It's not. There are some cons with that kind of outlook. And why would I tell you to embrace this outlook if there's cons? Because there's cons to everything. Nothing is all peachy keen. Nothing is all sunshine and rainbows. Nothing is all unicorns and fantasy creatures and all that kind of good stuff. One of the major cons that I have found with that kind of balanced outlook on things is that it really skews your perception on a lot of topics. Because once you understand that there's a balance to all things, it really makes it harder for you to pick a side on a particular topic. And we'll get more into that, because balance affects perception. It affects choice, which is some other topics we'll get into at another time. But the balance really affects that, because as you start to approach things with a balanced mindset and understanding that there's balance in the world, and understanding, again, balance has two sides to something, right? There's no light without dark. There's no dark without light. There's no good without bad. There's no bad without evil. And understanding that those two things can't exist without each other, because if you take away light, there is no dark. There's no shadow there, right? There's no shadow. It's all dark. And without something to contrast it to, dark doesn't exist, right? So we already said that. So it really starts to affect your mindset, and then topics, as you start to approach them with a particular mindset of balance and understanding those things, that you can't have one without the other, right? It really starts to skew your decision-making ability and your I don't say decision-making ability, but your stand-taking ability, because then you're like, okay, well, if I'm looking at the balance of this, then what's the other side, and what part of it can't go away because of this, right? So if I believe in this, what is the balance to that, right? And that becomes kind of a difficult position to be in the thought process, the thought-making process, the decision-making process. And it really begins to break down your concept of, especially like groupthink, or your like really, a lot of like your moral decision making, your value. I'm not saying it stops you from doing those things, but really you start to look at your morals and value decision making, especially like how you were raised and things like that, and you start breaking it down, and you go, and not that and that may not sound like necessarily a bad thing, right? But it can be, when a lot of the things that you would think, well, that's just an easy common sense judgment call based on how you were raised, you stop and think about those things, and you go, oh, maybe not, because of that other piece that's involved in that. So if you take away from this, then what balances that out? And sometimes it can be difficult. I'll give you an example because right now I haven't given you any concrete examples about that. I'm talking in philosophies and generalities, right? So, for example, long time ago, I used to be a union steward at a particular company I used to work for, right? And loved it, loved being able to stand up for the guys and gals on the floor against, and our company wasn't terrible. We actually started the union against a sole proprietor of this company. Not because he was a terrible boss, but just there was some unfairness that was going on. And we really needed things to be more fair. There were some safety issues and a few other things. And so when somebody would bring a grievance to the table, obviously, what's the first thing you want to do? Well, as a union steward, you want to represent this person. You want to be like, okay, look, this is not fair. Well, first off, you have to take fair off the table. There's no such thing as not fair. And you got to get that out of people's minds. You have to say, how does this violate the contract? Right? And how are you not being treated equitably with everybody else? Right? Because fair is a fucking opinion. Equitably is not. Equitably is a logical analysis. How is somebody else getting treated for the same situation that you are not getting treated? Somebody else working the same hours, put in the same position, put in the same exact amount of work, same duties, and you're not getting the same compensation, whatever, right? So how's that? What's going on that's violating the contract? But sometimes you get put in a position to where that judgment can affect another employee negatively. And how do you balance that out? What is the other side of that decision, right? What is the other side of that? And, a lot of guys would just go in and be like, I don't care about that. I've just got to fight for this person because it's all about this person and they're the ones with the grievance. And it's like, no, you can't just do that. Well, I'll just fight for the next person when it comes up. And it's like, you can't do that because you have to understand you may be setting a precedent, which if any of you guys and gals out there have ever been in a union, you have to understand precedent. But you could be setting a precedent that's binding against this other person. You can't do that, right? You have to understand the balance of those situations that you're in and how it's going to affect the next person. Yes, you could be helping this guy or gal out, this employee out right now, right? And they're going to get a smile for 10 minutes, but how is that affecting the next person down the road? What's the next piece of that? What's the consequential result of that? And who's going to get hurt? We had a young man who was he was getting ready to get terminated for attendance points. And the reason is he had some medical issues, but got down to his last couple of points. And basically he'd overslept. And I think the last night he had been drunk the night before and came in late. And he was going to get terminated. And there was nothing we could do for him. So some people were upset that we weren't fighting for him because he admitted he got drunk the night before. He admitted the last few times he had been partying and whatever. And, just didn't come in on time. And they were mad because we didn't fight for this kid. But earlier we had fought for a young lady who had gone through some severe medical issues and severe pregnancy issues and had got to her same points. And we didn't terminate her. We fought for her not to be terminated, I should say. We fought for her not to be terminated. And they didn't understand why that was a thing. And it's like, because we're setting a precedent that if somebody has medical issues, that the company won't terminate them, even if they don't have FMLA or whatever. We're not trying to set a precedent that you can just come in drunk or come in from the night before partying whatever you want to, and you still got a job. Now, I know that's going to offend some of you union guys and gals, and that's okay. You can be offended, but our union as a whole didn't want that to be a thing. We were kind of a small company, and we needed people to be there when they were supposed to be there. And, we didn't want people just to be able to just come in whenever the hell they felt like it because they were drunk the night before. But we did want people who had legitimate medical reasons, not to be fired for something that was outside of their control. That was just the thing we didn't want, right? That wasn't equitable in any way. Because this kid could help whether or not he came in from being drunk the night before. If it would have been a medical issue, we would have fought for this kid. So again, you have to balance out those things and understand where those things come from. If I would have fought for the kid and said, yeah, absolutely, he should stay, because she got to stay, this kid should be able to stay. And if we would have fought for her to stay just because, this kid would have got to stay because he had been drinking. And then the next time, oh, well, I'm just drinking whenever. And then basically your attendance thing gets thrown out the door because basically, if you're laying up because you're drunk and not coming into work the next day, then any excuse goes for you not to show up to work. Medical, legitimate. Got it. But that's an example. Again, whether you agree or not, that was part of the balancing out of the decision-making process. And that is a con. Again, believe it or not, that is a con, because you have to you question that process. And of course, there were a lot of people pissed off at us, right? Because we looked at that, and by a lot, I mean a handful. It wasn't really a lot. The entire union body as a whole, not the entire, but the union body as a whole, as a majority, I should say. To speak precisely, the union body as a majority said, no, absolutely. It's unfortunate that you all had to not fight for the guy, but, he kept coming in after he was laid up. It sucks to be him, but we get it, and yeah, we absolutely expect you to fight for somebody that's got medical issues that's outside of their control. Absolutely 100% unequivocally back you on that. So, but again, those are cons, because you have those instances where something seems unfair. I hate that term, by the way, unfair. And yet it's the mindset of you thinking what balances out in the long run. But at the same time, those things, that's important. It's important, and it's a benefit, right? It's a benefit for you to think that way, because it's important because of what we thought about. We protected the young lady, and we also set a good precedent that medical issues were important to the body of the union, to the employees. It was something we needed to protect, right? Something that was outside of people's control. And thinking that way is beneficial because you understand that there are repercussions to things, that you understand that there's an opposite side to whatever your particular topic may be, and that you need to balance your outlook to those topics, that you need to balance out. And I'm not saying you have to agree. So understanding that there's a balance doesn't mean you have to agree, right? And that's all about choice and perception that we'll get to in some future episodes. But understanding that there's a balance does not necessarily mean you agree. It just means that you understand that it's there, and that you make a mindset, right? And you develop a mindset or an intuition or whatever you want to call it, right? Aware that there's always an opposite side. There's always a balancing act to whatever it is that you're dealing with. right? But also understand, not just about topics and situations, but also understand like for like the good and the bad in the world, right? So if you're having a bad day, and I'm going to switch this up real quick too. So also understand if you're having a bad day, this may suck for you to hear, but because you're having a bad day, somebody else in the world is having a great day. And while you may not want to hear that, well, you may think, well, what does that do for me? Who cares if they're having a great day? One, you're being selfish as fuck. Get over it. But two, it's going to turn around. Somebody else is going to have a real shitty day just so you can have a good day, right? It's going to balance out at some point. And I would hope that you could at least take a small portion of happiness and joy in the fact that, well, you know what? I'm having a shitty day. So I know somebody else is having my portion of good day today. So rock on them. And I honestly look at it that way. You know, I always look at it, you know, if I'm having a really bad day, that means that somewhere out there, somebody is having a good day. And I can at least take some small satisfaction from that. Even if you can't, you know, try to look at it that way. Develop that mental outlook. And you'd be surprised what that can do to kind of like liven your day and, you know, maybe make you feel a little bit better about it. And so I'm just going to wrap this up, episode 1. So balance is kind of the core of how we're going to look at things moving forward. So as we talk about different topics, you're going to kind of get the sense of, even though I may have a particular stand on a topic, even though I may have a very definitive voice on a topic, you're going to hear me say a lot about however, or but, or I see the other side. And that's because I believe there's always a balance about things. I believe that we shouldn't swing from one extreme all the way over to the other extreme. We should be like, if there's a bad thing over here, we should be stringing to the balance, to the moderation of it, not all the way to the other extreme to fix or to understand. You know, we can already understand that it's there, but we don't have to swing to it and break it and then go back to here. We can just swing to the balance point and get to the really good place where we need to be, which is understanding that there's two sides. And the balance right here is kind of where we need to be to wiggle things out. So I hope you enjoyed that little rant, chat, kind of introduction to the way we're going to discuss things on Chat Operand. I hope to see you for episode 2. Episode 2, we're going to talk about perception and how the way you perceive things is going to affect the topics that we're going to talk about. Balance is going to play into a little bit of that, but we'll get into that on episode 2. And thank you for joining.